Dorothy Mae Jenkins stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting her pearl necklace with trembling fingers. Today wasn't just any ordinary day, it was the day she'd been dreaming about for over 50 years. At 80 years old, her reflection showed a woman who carried herself with grace, her silver hair neatly styled, and her eyes bright with anticipation. She walked over to her dresser and opened the top drawer, pulling out a small blue velvet box. Inside was a collection of newspaper clippings she'd saved over the years, advertisements for luxury cars she'd promised herself she'd own one day. Some of the papers had yellowed with age, dating back to the 1970s when she first started teaching at Washington Elementary School. The morning sun streamed through her window, catching the crystal bowl on her windowsill, the one her students had given her when she retired after 45 years of teaching. Inside that bowl were countless folded papers, each containing a small amount of money she'd set aside from every paycheck. Even during the toughest times, when her roof needed repairs or when her late husband needed medical care, she never touched this special savings. Dorothy sat on the edge of her bed, remembering all those years of careful planning. She thought about how she'd worked summer school sessions, tutored after hours, and invested wisely in property. Her friends often questioned why she lived so modestly when she could afford more. "I'm saving for something special," she'd always say with a knowing smile. She picked up her tablet, a gift from her grandchildren, and opened the luxury car website she'd been studying for months. Dorothy had done her research thoroughly, learning every detail about the car she wanted. She could recite the specifications by heart. The engine power, the safety features, even the type of leather used in the seats. This wasn't just about buying a car, it was about achieving a dream she held onto since she was a young teacher, watching these same luxury vehicles drive past her classroom window. As she gathered her documents, bank statements, ID, and the notebook where she'd written down all her questions about the car, Dorothy thought about her mother. She'd been a housekeeper for wealthy families, and she always told Dorothy, "Baby, dream big and work hard. One day, you'll walk into those fancy stores like you own them." Today, the Elite Motors dealership stood like a glass palace against the morning sky, its windows gleaming in the sunlight. Dorothy pulled into the parking lot, carefully choosing a spot near the entrance. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror one last time, making sure her favorite coral lipstick was perfect. Her heart flooded with excitement, the same feeling she... 5 minutes passed, then 10. Dorothy stood in the middle of the showroom, her presence seemingly invisible to the sales staff bustling around her. She watched as a salesperson eagerly greeted a younger couple who had just walked in, whisking them away to look at the latest models. The contrast wasn't lost on her, it was a familiar feeling, one she'd experienced too many times in her 8 decades of life. She'd chosen her outfit carefully that morning. A tailored navy suit that spoke of sophistication, paired with her favorite pearl necklace, a graduation gift from her first class of students who'd pooled their money together to buy it for her. Her silver hair was styled perfectly, and she carried herself with the poise of someone who'd spent decades in front of classrooms. Yet here she stood, unacknowledged. Dorothy thought about leaving. The thought crossed her mind briefly, like a shadow passing over the sun. But then she remembered what she always told her students when they faced obstacles: your presence matters. Stand your ground with dignity. She'd spent 45 years teaching children to stand up for themselves with grace and determination. Now was not the time to forget her own lessons. Through the pristine windows, she could see her reliable old car in the parking lot, the one she'd driven to school for 15 years, the one that had carried countless boxes of school supplies and stacks of papers to grade. Today was supposed to be the day she finally retired it, replaced it with something she'd dreamed of for so long. Her hand tightened slightly around her handbag, feeling the weight of the documents inside that proved she could buy any car in the showroom. Finally, a young salesperson approached her, his name tag reading Robert. His demeanor spoke volumes, the slightly raised eyebrow, the quick up and down glance that assessed her worth based on appearance alone. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone suggesting he doubted he could. Dorothy had heard that tone before, in stores, in restaurants, in places where people looked at her and made assumptions. "Yes," Dorothy replied with the calm authority she perfected over decades of handling unruly students. "I'm interested in looking at your new models. She specifically gestured toward the flagship vehicle she'd researched extensively, the one that cost more than most people's yearly salary. Robert's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well," he said, already turning his body toward the pre-owned section, "we have some very nice certified used vehicles that might be more suitable for your needs." He spoke slowly, as if she might have trouble understanding him, another assumption that made Dorothy's heart sink even as her resolve strengthened. She watched as another customer walked in, a businessman in an expensive suit, and was immediately greeted by the sales manager himself. They were already discussing financing options and special features before they'd even reached the vehicle the man was interested in. No one had asked him to prove he could afford anything. Dorothy thought about her students again. How many times had she sat with them, discussing their dreams, telling them that times were changing, that doors were opening? She thought about the little girl who'd just skipped through the showroom, wide-eyed with wonder. What would she tell that child if she saw her being treated this way 20 years from now? The air conditioning hummed softly overhead, and Dorothy could hear the gentle music playing through the dealership speakers. She noticed how Robert kept glancing toward other customers, as if hoping someone would rescue him from having to deal with her. She'd seen that look before too, the look of someone who'd already decided what she was worth based on nothing but prejudice. "Actually," Dorothy said, her voice carrying the same clear, firm tone she'd used to command attention in countless parent-teacher conferences, "I'm specifically interested in the new model right there." She pointed to the exact car she'd spent months researching. "And I'd like to discuss purchasing it today." Robert's face showed a flicker of disbelief, quickly masked but not quickly enough. Dorothy had spent too many years reading faces not to notice. He cleared his throat, shuffled his feet slightly, and then said something that made her blood run cold. "Ma'am, these vehicles are quite expensive. Perhaps we should discuss financing options, or—" Dorothy felt a familiar calm settle over her, the kind of composure she'd developed through years of handling difficult situations in her classroom. She opened her handbag with deliberate slowness, the same way she used to pace her actions when teaching a particularly important lesson. "Before we discuss financing," she said quietly, "I'd like to test drive the vehicle I'm interested in purchasing." Robert shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward his manager's office. "Well, ma'am, we have certain protocols we need to follow. Perhaps if you could provide some proof of funds first." His voice trailed off as Dorothy removed a neat folder from her bag, one labeled "Car Purchase" in her precise handwriting. "In my 45 years of teaching," Dorothy began, her voice carrying the same gentle authority that had commanded attention from generations of students, "I learned something very important about assumptions." She placed her reading glasses on her nose, the ones that hung from a gold chain around her neck. "Would you like to know what that is?" Through the showroom windows, the morning sun had climbed higher, casting bright rectangles of light across the polished floor. In one of these patches of sunshine, Dorothy stood, her shadow stretching long behind her. She noticed how other customers had slowed their conversations, their attention drawn to the scene unfolding. "I've noticed," she continued, maintaining the same calm tone she'd used when addressing school board meetings, "that you haven't asked me about my budget. You haven't asked about my preferences. You haven't even offered me a cup of coffee, though I've seen 3 other customers receive that courtesy since I arrived." She opened her folder, removing several neatly organized bank statements. "I've also noticed that the gentleman who arrived after me was immediately offered a test drive of a vehicle more expensive than the one I'm interested in. No proof of funds required." The papers in her hands didn't tremble. Years of holding chalk steady while writing on blackboards had given her that control. Robert's face flushed red as Dorothy laid out her financial documents on the gleaming hood of the nearest display car. There were property deeds for 3 rental homes, investment portfolios that had grown steadily over decades, and bank statements showing numbers that made his eyes widen. "I'm not here to make you uncomfortable," Dorothy said, thinking about all the teachable moments she'd created in her classroom over the years. "I'm here to buy a car, specifically that one." She pointed to the luxury vehicle she'd researched so thoroughly. "And I can pay for it in full today." The showroom had grown quieter now. The sales manager, finally noticing the situation, began making his way over. Dorothy could see his reflection in the polished surface of the car beside her, straightening his tie as he approached. She thought about her mother, who had cleaned houses her whole life, saying, "Baby, there'll be days when you have to teach people how to treat you." Now, Dorothy said, gathering her documents with the same precise movements she once used to collect test papers, "I have two questions. First, would you like to explain why I needed to prove my ability to purchase before being offered a test drive? And second," she paused, adjusting her glasses, "would you like to show me the vehicle I came here to buy, or should I visit one of your competitors?" The sales manager had reached them now, his face a mask of professional concern. Dorothy could read the worry in his expression, the same look she'd seen on administrators' faces when they realized a situation had gotten out of hand. She watched as he whispered something to Robert, who quickly stepped away. "Mrs. Jenkins," the manager began, having clearly read her name from the documents still visible in her folder. "I want to personally apologize for any misunderstanding." Dorothy raised her hand slightly, the same gesture she'd used countless times to quiet a noisy classroom. "There's no misunderstanding here," she said softly but firmly. "What's happened is very clear. The question is, what happens next?" She thought about all the times she'd given her students second chances, opportunities to learn from their mistakes. "I'm still interested in purchasing a vehicle today, but I need to know that I'm going to be treated with the respect I deserve." The sales manager pulled up a chair for Dorothy, his entire demeanor transformed. She sat down with the same grace she'd shown in countless parent-teacher conferences, arranging her folder of documents on the desk before her. The morning light streamed through the windows, catching the diamonds in her wedding ring, a symbol of another dream she'd achieved through years of dedication. "Let me tell you a story," Dorothy began, her voice carrying the warmth she'd used to captivate thousands of students over the years. "I started teaching in 1978, making just $9,000 a year. Every month, I put aside a little bit of money in a special savings account." She opened her folder, revealing a bank book with entries dating back decades. The manager leaned forward, his eyes widening as he saw the careful documentation of a lifetime of strategic saving and investing. "While other teachers bought new cars or took fancy vacations, I invested in property. Started small, a tiny house that needed work. Fixed it up myself on weekends, rented it out. Did that again and again." She pulled out photographs, old Polaroids of herself painting walls, fixing cabinets, standing proudly in front of her investment properties. "My husband thought I was too cautious with money, but I had a dream. I wanted to walk into a place like this one day and buy exactly what I wanted, no questions asked." The dealership had grown quiet. Other customers were pretending not to listen, but Dorothy could see them stealing glances. She thought about her students, how they'd lean in when she was teaching something particularly important. This, too, was a teaching moment. "I've served on the board of 3 different banks," she continued, laying out letters of recommendation from financial institutions. "I've put both my children through college, helped set up college funds for all 5 of my grandchildren, and still managed to build a portfolio that would surprise you." She paused, adjusting her glasses the way she used to before making an important point in class. "But do you know what surprised me today? Walking into this dealership to buy a car I've dreamed about for my 80th birthday and being judged not by the content of my bank account, but by assumptions about who I am." The manager's face flushed as Dorothy pulled out one final document, a printout of the exact car model she wanted, with all its specifications highlighted and annotated in her neat handwriting. "I've researched this vehicle for 6 months. I know every feature, every option package, every color choice available. I can tell you the horsepower, the torque, the fuel efficiency in both city and highway driving." A small crowd had gathered nearby, other salespeople, customers, even a mechanic in his work uniform who'd wandered in from the service department. Dorothy thought about all the times she'd stood in front of assemblies, teaching children about dignity, about standing up for themselves, about doing it with grace. Today was meant to be a celebration, she said, her voice gentle but firm. "After 80 years of life, 45 years of teaching, 30 years of investing, and countless dreams deferred, I walked in here ready to make a purchase that would honor all of that hard work." She closed her folder slowly. "Instead, I had to prove myself worthy of basic courtesy." The manager started to speak, but Dorothy raised her hand slightly, the same gesture that had quieted thousands of chattering students over the years. "I'm not sharing this to make anyone feel bad. I'm sharing this because sometimes the best lessons come from moments like these. She stood up, smoothing her suit jacket with the same precise movements she used to straighten her teaching robes at graduation ceremonies. Now, would anyone like to actually sell me a car today? I have the funds ready for a full cash purchase, and as I mentioned, I know exactly which model I want. Or should I take my business elsewhere? News of what happened at Elite Motors spread faster than a playground rumor. By evening, Dorothy's phone was ringing nonstop. First, it was her former students, now doctors, lawyers, business owners, who'd heard through social media. One of them, a local news reporter she taught in 3rd grade, asked to share her story. Dorothy sat in her favorite armchair, the one by the window where she used to grade papers, as she considered the request. She thought about staying quiet. She'd never been one to make a fuss. But then she remembered what she always told her students. Sometimes your experience can be a lesson that helps others grow. The next morning, she agreed to tell her story, speaking with the same gentle clarity she'd used in her classroom. She didn't name names or point fingers. Instead, she talked about dignity, about dreams, about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. Her words resonated with people across the city, then the state, then beyond. Her daughter helped her read the responses flooding in online. There were comments from other elderly people who'd faced similar treatment. Business professionals shared stories of walking into high-end stores and being ignored. Young people wrote about how her story inspired them to stand up for themselves with grace. Other luxury car dealerships reached out, their messages filling her email inbox. One owner wrote about his grandmother, who'd faced similar prejudice decades ago. Another shared how Dorothy's story had sparked important conversations among their staff. They weren't just offering her cars, they were offering apologies and gratitude for shining a light on an uncomfortable truth. Dorothy's phone buzzed with a message from Mrs. Chen, her neighbor. The local business association wanted Dorothy to speak at their next meeting about customer service and dignity. As she read the invitation, she smiled, thinking about how life had turned her into a teacher once again, just in a different classroom. The story reached her former school, where teachers used it in lessons about respect and prejudice. Her granddaughter, who taught at the same school, told her how students were discussing it in class. "They're so proud to be connected to you, Grandma," she said during their weekly Sunday dinner. "They keep saying, 'That's our Mrs. Jenkins.'" Local community groups began sharing stories of similar experiences, turning Dorothy's moment into a movement for change. Business schools contacted her about using her experience as a case study in their customer service training. Dorothy thought about all the times she'd told her students that one voice could make a difference. Now she was living proof. A week after the incident, Dorothy received a letter from a retired teacher in another state. "I've been saving for my dream car too," the letter read. "Your story gave me the courage to walk into that dealership with my head held high." Dorothy carefully placed the letter in her special folder, right next to her students' thank you notes from over the years. The original dealership's corporate office sent a formal apology, along with an invitation to help train their staff nationwide. They wanted to learn from her experience, to make sure no other customer ever felt the way she had. Dorothy read their letter twice, thinking about all the times she'd given her students second chances, opportunities to learn and grow from their mistakes. Her son called, worried that all the attention might be too much for her. But Dorothy felt energized. In 45 years of teaching, she'd learned that the best lessons often came from unexpected moments. Now, at 80 years old, she was still teaching, still making a difference, still helping people learn and grow. As she sat in her living room, surrounded by photographs of her teaching years, Dorothy realized that this experience, though painful, had turned into something powerful. It wasn't just about buying a car anymore. It was about dignity, respect, and the change that can happen when someone stands up and tells their truth with grace. 2 weeks after the incident at Elite Motors, Dorothy walked into Riverside Luxury Cars, her folder of documents tucked under her arm. This time, the experience was completely different. The owner himself greeted her at the door. A former student's parent who remembered her from school concerts and PTA meetings 20 years ago. The showroom buzzed with a warm energy as Dorothy described exactly what she wanted. She didn't need to pull out her financial documents or prove herself. Instead, she found herself sharing stories about teaching his daughter, about watching children grow up to achieve their dreams, about the power of treating everyone with respect. "Mrs. Jenkins," he said, using the name she'd been known by for 45 years in the classroom, "would you like to see your car?" He led her to a vehicle that matched her specifications perfectly. The same model she'd researched for months, in a deep blue color that reminded her of the sky on the first day of school. As she sat in the driver's seat for the first time, Dorothy's hands glided over the leather steering wheel. She thought about her mother, who'd cleaned other people's fancy cars all her life, always telling her, "Baby, one day you'll have something special of your own." The new car smell reminded her of fresh notebooks at the start of each school year, full of possibility and promise. The test drive felt like a victory lap around her life's achievements. She drove past her old elementary school, where current teachers and students had gathered outside to wave. She passed by the small house she first bought as an investment, now fully renovated and providing housing for a young family. Each turn brought back memories of the path that had led her to this moment. When she returned to the dealership to complete the paperwork, Dorothy noticed something different. The owner had put up a new sign in the showroom, "Everyone's dream deserves respect." He told her how her story had inspired him to start a monthly workshop for his staff about inclusive customer service. That evening, Dorothy drove her new car home, its sophisticated engine purring quietly through the familiar streets of her neighborhood. Mrs. Chen was in her garden as usual, but this time she had her entire family with her, all of them waiting to celebrate Dorothy's moment. They'd organized a small surprise gathering, former students, neighbors, and friends, all there to share in her joy. Her granddaughter had set up a small display on the porch, photographs from Dorothy's teaching years paired with notes from former students about how she'd taught them to stand up for themselves with grace. Among them was a new addition, a picture of Dorothy with her luxury car, a symbol not just of achievement, but of perseverance and dignity. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the gathering, Dorothy shared what she'd learned from this experience. Sometimes, she told them, using her teacher voice one more time, life's biggest lessons come when we least expect them. What matters isn't just achieving our dreams, but how we handle the obstacles along the way. The local business association had asked her to help develop a training program about customer service and respect. 3 other car dealerships had invited her to speak to their staff. A local college wanted her to guest lecture about perseverance and dignity in their business ethics class. Her story had started a conversation that was creating real change. Dorothy parked her new car in her driveway that night, its elegant lines gleaming under the streetlights. She thought about all the years she'd spent saving for this moment, all the little choices that had led her here. But more than the car itself, she felt proud of standing her ground, of turning a moment of disrespect into an opportunity for growth and change. Before going inside, she ran her hand along the car's smooth surface one more time. This wasn't just a luxury vehicle. It was a testament to dreams held close for decades, to dignity maintained in the face of prejudice, to the power of standing up for oneself with grace. And most importantly, it was proof of what she'd always told her students: hold on to your dreams, work hard, and never let anyone tell you what you can't achieve.